When Dad read the will, my brother stood tall beside him, the golden son of a golden farm. I watched as the lawyer slid a folder across the oak table, his voice smooth and final. "The estate goes to Michael." Then he turned to me, hesitated, and added, "Your father left you something too." From his briefcase, he pulled a single key, old and chipped, attached to a worn leather tag that read, "Truck." Everyone chuckled. I didn't. Outside, behind the machinery shed, I found it, a 1968 Ford F-100, red once, now the color of regret. The engine bay was home to a family of mice, the windshield cracked like old ice. I leaned on the hood, feeling the chill of the metal seep through my palm. This wasn't just a truck. It was Dad's final test. That night, I slept little. Memories rolled like film reels, Dad teaching Michael to plow straight lines while I fixed fences alone. He never said much, but I knew his silence meant something I hadn't yet learned to understand. At dawn, I walked back to the barn. The sun hit the rusted chrome, and for the first time, I saw beauty there. Not in what it was, but in what it could become. I turned the key. Nothing but a dull click. But I smiled anyway. If Michael had the land, I'd claim the road. I'd rebuild this piece of metal into something that could outlast fences and inheritance papers. The truck wouldn't just run again. It would roar. Tomorrow I'd begin, with borrowed tools, scraped knuckles, and the stubborn hope that maybe Dad hadn't left me behind after all. The first wrench turn echoed like a declaration. The bolt screamed, the metal resisted, but I wasn't backing down. The air smelled of oil and dust, and the morning sun bled through the slats of the barn, painting golden stripes across the Ford's hood. I had no manual, no budget, and no one cheering me on. Just a coffee can of bolts, a borrowed socket set, and a will stronger than steel. Michael drove past around noon in Dad's old tractor, slowing just long enough to smirk. "You really think that heap's worth your time?" he called out. I didn't answer. I just kept working, letting the ratchet's click drown him out. Every turn of that wrench was a reply he didn't deserve to hear. By evening, I drained the sludge from the engine and scraped away years of grime. Beneath the rust, I found silver, not just in the metal, but in myself. Each flake that fell felt like a layer of doubt peeling away. I remembered how Dad used to say, "A man's worth ain't what he's handed, but what he builds." Maybe that's why he left me the truck. Not to punish me, but to push me. To see if I could take something broken and make it breathe again. I pulled up an old stool, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and stared at that lifeless engine. "We're gonna make it, you and me," I whispered. It sounded crazy, but talking to it felt right. Outside, the cicadas began their chorus. Inside, I closed the barn doors, sealing in the smell of grease, rust, and redemption. Tomorrow, I'd start on the carburetor, the heart of the machine, and maybe, just maybe, the start of finding mine. By sunrise, the barn was already warm. I had the carburetor spread across the workbench like a puzzle missing its picture. Springs, screws, gaskets, each one held together by memory and patience. I worked slow, careful not to rush the process. Machines, like people, don't respond well to being forced. The old radio on the shelf buzzed between static and country songs. Then, out of nowhere, one of Dad's favorite tunes played, a deep, crackling voice singing about dirt roads and second chances. I froze. It felt like he was right there, watching, not judging, just waiting to see if I'd finally listen. I tightened the last screw, adjusted the float, and held the carburetor up to the light. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole. That was more than I'd felt in a long time. Michael showed up at the doorway, leaning on the frame. "Still pretending you're a mechanic?" he asked, smirking. "Dad gave me the land because he knew I'd use it." I didn't look up. "Yeah," I said, "and he gave me this because he knew I wouldn't quit." His grin faltered for a moment before he walked off without another word. As dusk rolled in, I bolted the carburetor back in place. The smell of gas and hope filled the air. I turned the key. The starter groaned, then caught for half a second before dying again. My pulse jumped anyway. That sound, brief as it was, meant life. I sat on the step of the barn watching the sunset burn across the horizon. For the first time, I didn't envy Michael's acres. I had something better. A purpose. Tomorrow, I'd clean the fuel lines and give that old heart a real chance to beat. The next morning came with fog thick as milk. I stepped into the barn, my boots crunching on gravel, and felt that quiet hum of anticipation that only hard work brings. The truck sat there like a sleeping giant, waiting for its next breath. I rolled up my sleeves and went straight for the wiring harness. The veins of the old beast. Half the insulation had turned to powder. I replaced what I could, spliced what I couldn't, my fingers black with soot and copper dust. Electricity had always scared me a little. Invisible, unpredictable, like Dad's temper when things broke. But fear, I was learning, was just rust of the spirit. You scrape it off by doing. By noon, I had the new wires laid in clean lines. I connected the battery, whispered a small prayer, and turned the key. Nothing, just silence. Then, faintly, a single spark popped from the coil, bright as a firefly in the gloom. I laughed. It wasn't a start, but it was a sign. I grabbed a sandwich, sat on the tailgate, and let the quiet settle around me. I thought about how Michael probably hadn't turned a wrench in his life. The farm was his, but he'd never earn it like I was earning this. When night came, I lit a lantern and kept working. The light danced across the walls, catching old nails and forgotten tools. I imagined Dad standing there, arms crossed, that half grin he'd give when something finally worked. At midnight, I cranked it again. The truck coughed, spit smoke, and died, but that spark had multiplied. There was life under that hood now, faint but certain. I closed the barn doors with greasy hands, heart steady. Tomorrow, we'd chase that spark until it roared. When I turned the key the next morning, the starter groaned like an old man climbing stairs. The engine coughed, choked, then quit. I didn't curse it. I'd learned by now that frustration only feeds failure. Instead, I stood there listening, as if the truck was trying to tell me what it needed. I pulled the plugs, checked the gaps, cleaned each one until it shone. The smell of gas and oil mixed with sawdust, a scent that had started to feel like home. Every part had a story. Who last replaced it? When it failed? Why it was left to die? Machines carry history the way people carry secrets. By noon, my hands were shaking from the effort. I paused to sip black coffee from an old thermos that used to be Dad's. The initials RT were scratched into the lid. Robert Thompson, the man who believed in soil and silence. I ran my thumb across the letters and whispered, "You could have told me what this meant." A gust of wind rattled the barn doors, and for a second, it felt like he answered. The light shifted, hitting the Ford's hood just right, turning rust into copper. That's when I realized something simple but true. Maybe the old man hadn't shortchanged me at all. Maybe he'd handed me the only thing that could make me prove myself. I reattached the plugs, turned the key once more. The engine sputtered longer this time, 3 full seconds of life before falling quiet. It was progress. I leaned back, wiped my face with a rag, and laughed. Not the easy kind, but the tired, grateful kind. The kind that says, "I'm getting closer." Tomorrow I'd tackle the fuel pump. One more day, one more chance. I woke before sunrise to the sound of distant thunder, though the sky was clear. Maybe it was in my chest. I grabbed my toolbox, a handful of wrenches, and that stubborn will that kept me going. Today was the day I'd deal with the fuel system, the heart line that would finally carry life into the engine. The fuel tank was coated with years of dust and resentment. I drained what was left inside. The smell hit me hard, half gasoline, half decay. I cleaned it with boiling water and detergent, rinsed, and left it to dry. It felt like exorcising a ghost. When I crawled under the truck to replace the pump, I caught sight of something etched faintly into the frame. R.T. and Sons. My chest tightened. Dad must have carved that himself decades ago. Maybe he hadn't forgotten me after all. Maybe he'd expected this moment. Michael drove by again, slowing down near the gate. "You're wasting your time," he called out. I looked up, grease on my face, and said, "Maybe, but it's my time to waste." He drove off without answering, and for once, I didn't feel small. By afternoon, the pump was mounted, the lines reconnected, and my hands trembling from exhaustion. I turned the key. The starter turned, caught, and this time the truck didn't die right away. It coughed, growled, then roared alive in a deep, uneven rhythm that made my chest vibrate. I jumped back, laughing, shouting, "You're alive!" The barn echoed with it. Smoke filled the air, but to me it smelled like victory. For the first time in years, I felt proud. Not of what I owned, but of what I'd earned. Tomorrow, I'd take her out into the open field. The morning light hit the chrome like a blessing. The Ford stood proud in the barn doorway. No longer just a relic, but something alive. I checked the fluids one last time, tightened the hoses, and adjusted the choke. My hands were trembling again, but not from fear. This was anticipation. Today I'd find out if all those long nights had meant something. I climbed in, the seat springs creaking under my weight. The steering wheel was rough and worn smooth in the places Dad's hands once held it. I turned the key, and the truck roared awake, coughing once before settling into a growl that shook the barn walls. It wasn't perfect, but neither was I. We'd both come back from worse. I eased it into gear. The tires rolled over the dirt, crunching gravel that hadn't moved in decades. Every bump felt like memory. When I reached the main road, I stopped for a second. The farm stretched behind me, endless and golden under the sun. That land was Michael's now, but this moment was mine. The wind rushed through the open windows as I accelerated. The sound of the engine rose like laughter after a long silence. The truck carried more than me. It carried everything Dad never said, every apology he didn't know how to make. I drove past the edge of town, down the road that led nowhere and everywhere. People stared. Maybe they recognized the old truck. Maybe they just saw a man finally becoming himself. When I parked back at the barn, the engine ticked softly as it cooled, like a heartbeat settling after a sprint. I leaned against the hood and whispered, "We did it." Tomorrow I'd start building the rest of my life. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the engine's rhythm. Steady, alive, almost human. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a heartbeat, echoing the one I thought I'd lost the day Dad read that will. I lay awake thinking about what came next. The truck was running, sure, but rebuilding it had rebuilt me too. Now it was time to take that strength somewhere it mattered. The next morning I drove into town. The old men at the diner stopped mid-sip when they saw me pull up. "Ain't that Robert's truck?" one of them muttered. I just smiled and tipped my cap. They didn't need the story, they could see it written in the grease under my nails. I filled the tank, wiped the windshield, and decided to take the long road home, the kind Dad used to drive when he wanted to think. The Ford hummed under me, strong and steady. Every mile felt like forgiveness. When I turned into the old driveway, Michael was by the fence, barking orders at the workers. He froze when he saw me pull up, the same truck he'd mocked now gleaming in the sunlight. "You finished it?" he asked. I stepped out, leaned on the door, and nodded. "No," I said quietly. It finished me. He didn't answer. For the first time, his confidence cracked. Maybe he saw what I'd found. Peace, not property. As I parked the truck back inside the barn, I realized something simple. Dad's gift wasn't about fairness. It was about freedom. The sun set over the fields, painting everything in gold. I closed the barn door, whispering, "Thanks, old man. I get it now." The next morning, I opened the truck's glove box to look for an old registration form and found something that made my hands go still. A folded envelope yellowed at the edges, with my name written in Dad's unmistakable handwriting, Ethan. The ink was faded, the paper fragile, but my pulse pounded as if it had just been written. I sat in the driver's seat, the smell of oil and dust around me, and unfolded it slowly. His words were short, the way he always spoke. Plain, honest, heavy. "If you're reading this, it means I did right by giving Michael the land. He needs the ground. You need the journey. The farm will feed him, but the road will feed you. Don't hate me for knowing the difference." I leaned back, staring at the dashboard. It hit me like a quiet thunderclap. He'd understood me better than I ever thought he could. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd handed me my own way out, disguised as failure. I read the letter again, slower this time until the words blurred. I wasn't angry anymore. All those years I'd spent trying to earn his approval, I'd missed the truth. He'd already given it. Outside, Michael walked toward the barn. I handed him the letter without a word. He read it, jaw tightening. When he finally looked up, there was something like shame in his eyes. "Guess he knew us both," he muttered. "Yeah," I said. "Better than we knew ourselves." We stood there for a while, the silence not heavy anymore. The truck's metal ticked in the warmth of the sun. That night I pinned the letter above my workbench. Every time I looked at it, I felt Dad's voice in the hum of the engine. The days after finding Dad's letter felt different. The barn didn't seem so empty anymore. I woke earlier, worked longer, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The Ford sat in the center like a monument to everything I'd learned: patience, persistence, forgiveness. But the truck wasn't the end of the story. It was just the start. I began repairing other old machines left to rot around town. Tractors, pickups, even a motorcycle that hadn't run since the 80s. Word spread fast. Folks who once pitied me now showed up asking for help. "He's the Thompson boy who fixed his daddy's truck," they'd say. It made me proud, but it also made me humble. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something real, one bolt at a time. Michael came by one evening, quieter than usual. "The north field flooded again," he said. "I could use your help." I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll bring the truck." We worked side by side until sunset, barely talking, but it didn't matter. The silence wasn't made of distance anymore. It was respect. When the water finally drained and the soil settled, he clapped me on the shoulder. "Dad would have liked this," he said. "Us, working together." I smiled, looking at the horizon. Maybe that's what he wanted all along. As the sun dipped below the fields, I realized how far I'd come. Not in miles, but in understanding. The land was still his, the truck was still mine, but the bond between them, between us, was finally fixed. That night, as I parked the Ford in the barn, it no longer felt like Dad's truck. It was ours. A month later, the county fair rolled into town. It wasn't much, some rides, livestock, and a small car show near the main stage, but I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. I polished every inch of the Ford, buffed the hood until it caught the sun like a mirror, and drove down Main Street with the windows open and my heart steady. When I pulled into the fairgrounds, people turned their heads. Kids pointed, old men nodded, and one mechanic I used to work for whistled low. "Didn't think that rust heap would ever move again," he said. I just grinned. Neither did I. Michael showed up halfway through the day, dusty from the fields but smiling for once. "You entering it?" he asked. I shrugged. Didn't fix her for trophies. He walked around the truck, running a hand over the fender. "You might win anyway." The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers as judges made their rounds. They stopped at the Ford, asked a few questions, scribbled notes, then moved on. When the results came in, I didn't even look up. I was too busy watching the sunset paint the chrome gold. Then the crowd started clapping. Someone called my name. First place, Ethan Thompson, 1968 Ford F-100 Restoration. Michael was the first to pat my back. "Looks like Dad's truck found its place again," he said. I held the small trophy, but my eyes were on the sky. The applause faded into something deeper, a peace I'd never known. It wasn't about winning, it was about proving that what's broken can rise again, stronger for the breaking. That night I drove home slow, the fair lights fading behind me, the engine humming like a promise kept. The next morning, the trophy sat on the kitchen table, catching the early light. I stared at it while sipping coffee from Dad's old thermos, the same one I'd carried through every step of this journey. The prize wasn't metal or shine, it was the silence inside me that no longer hurt. I took the truck out before the town woke. The roads were empty, mist rising off the fields. The Ford purred steady, every sound a reminder of the nights I'd almost given up. I rolled down the window, breathed the cool air, and realized that everything I'd been searching for had been right here, in the work, in the waiting, in the forgiveness. When I reached the edge of town, I saw the old "For Sale" sign at the abandoned service station. The building was falling apart, but something about it felt right. I parked, stepped out, and stood there imagining it. Clean windows, open doors, an old sign out front that read, "Thompson and Sons Restoration." That night, I told Michael my plan. He didn't laugh this time. He just nodded. "Dad would be proud," he said quietly. And for once, I believed it. The next day, I bought the place. I spent weeks fixing it up, one wall at a time, the same way I'd rebuilt that truck. And when I finally hung the sign, I knew I'd built more than a business. I'd built a bridge between who I was and who I'd become. As the sun set behind the barn, I sat in the Ford, listening to the engine idle softly. "We did it," I whispered. "All of it." To everyone listening, thank you for coming along this road. Tell me in the comments where you're hearing this story from, and don't forget to subscribe for the next ride. It's been a year since that first spark flickered under the hood. The barn looks different now, tools lined up on the walls, the scent of oil and cedar mixing in the air, and the Ford sitting in the corner like a quiet guardian. Sometimes I catch myself just standing there, listening to the ticking of cooling metal after a drive, like it's breathing along with me. Business at the new shop grew faster than I expected. Folks bring their old machines from miles away, tractors, bikes, trucks left for dead, and I bring them back one by one. Each repair feels like telling another story, one about resilience, love, and time. People don't just want engines fixed. They want meaning restored. Michael stops by every weekend now. We talk more than we ever did growing up. Sometimes we just sit on the tailgate, drinking coffee and watching the horizon. There's no rivalry left, no bitterness. The land is his, the road is mine, and somehow that feels exactly as it should. I still keep Dad's letter pinned above my workbench. The paper's getting brittle, but I won't replace it. It's a reminder that some things aren't meant to stay new. They're meant to be carried. Last night I took the truck out again, just me and the road. The moonlight hit the windshield, and I swear I saw Dad's reflection beside mine for a second. Calm, proud, at peace. Maybe he was never gone. Maybe he's been riding shotgun all along. To everyone who's listened to this story, thank you for being here. Tell me in the comments where you're from, and if you've ever rebuilt something that rebuilt you. And don't forget to subscribe, because every ending is just the start of another road.